طيب سمعت كان أنا عندنا الحين قصة بنسأل عنها، كان بقول لك العبيد بيشتروهم مشترى.
أي نعم، العبيد تو من وين؟
أنا ما بعرف.
من سيوبي.
من وين؟
من سيوبي.
سيوبي؟
من سيوبي خاص. الحين في مو معروف جد.
مو معروف.
ولا مو معروف. جد مش معروف، مو عارف جد، بس تربوني خلاص.
يعني جو مشترى.
أي نعم. العبيد مشترى. العبيد لا تحسب الحاجة يعني يمكن.
لا احنا ندور الكلمة هذا.
العبيد مشترى من الأساس.
صح.
مو تقري، هذا رسمي.
الحين احنا ذيك اليوم جاب الكلمة من قيمة اسبوعين، كلمة العبيد مشترى، احنا زعلتنا الصراحة.
ليه؟ زعل الدرد على الحيط اللي وراه. اشتروكوا بالمصاري. العبيد.
These are modern victims of slavery, which still goes on in parts of Asia and Africa. But it's the issue of American slavery, which ended more than a century ago, that's taken center stage here. Leaders like Fidel Castro are calling on the United States to make reparations to pay for its past. Cuba supports the idea of reparations as an unavoidable moral duty, they said. The United States fought hard to keep reparations for slavery off the conference agenda. But African Americans here have made sure the controversial idea is getting lots of attention.
The idea of reparations, time has come. It will not go back. The question left is how and in what form it will take place.
Charles Ogletree Jr., professor of law at Harvard, says that America has to recognize its responsibility, even if it costs billions of dollars.
We will make sure that people understand that a debt is owed to the Africans who died in America.
But there's no consensus on reparations, not in the United States and not at this conference. Few white Americans support the idea of payment, and neither do some African leaders. Meanwhile, the rhetorical battle over historic slavery threatens to overshadow the plight of Mariama and the thousands of modern slaves who were not lucky enough to escape. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, London.
Diplomats will leave the conference if Palestinian delegates don't drop a proposal to label Israel a colonial oppressor. Palestinians say the proposal reflects popular opinion.
Our dealing with Zionism as a political ideology, I think, reflects a feeling of civil societies in the whole world would have sentiments, to the just struggle of the Palestinians for national liberation and for the demolition of an apartheid system which is being established in Palestine.
U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell is boycotting the conference, but
the conference resolutions, and there's been fairly strong criticism of the United States from a number of other national delegations and governments, like the government of South Africa and several others.
Let's go back to the compromise and its foundering. The way you described it, it sounded as if the U.S. and Israel were at least ready to support this compromise, and it was the Arab states that weren't. Did you mean to say that? Is that what happened?
Well, I think something along those lines happened, but what we don't know is exactly what that compromise was. Representative Lantos had said early in the day that he had reviewed the Norwegian proposal and found it satisfactory, but that it was, as he put it, the final language that he could live with, meaning that if there was any change whatsoever to the language, that he would not support the U.S. delegation remaining through the end of the conference.
Doug, implicit in your discussion about the compromise is that if the U.S. couldn't get a compromise and it went to an up or down vote, the U.S. would have lost. Is that the case?
Presumably that's a fair inference, but there's also a symbolic element to all of this that I think can't be overlooked, and that is that the U.S. has made it clear in the months leading up to this and over the past 2 weeks that it did not wish to be engaged in a kind of open, acrimonious debate in which the kinds of charges about the Israelis which have been leveled were part of the discussion. And the U.S. has been harshly criticized by some parties for an unwillingness to discuss, not just an unwillingness to consider adopting language. And so I think part of this also was there was some symbolism in all of this as well, in that the U.S. was making a very clear statement that whether it could win the vote or not, it wasn't going to engage in a continuing discussion in which the Israelis were being branded as an apartheid racist state.
All right, and briefly, where does the conference go from here now?
Well, it proceeds, and there are another 5 days, another 4 days of negotiations and drafting will happen, and at the end of that, presumably there'll be a vote on a resolution and a plan of action, and all of that will now happen without the participation of the Israelis or the U.S.
All right, Doug Blackman, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Test, in his words, hateful
language against Israel. A draft document condemns an alleged increase of racist practices of Zionism and claims Zionism is based on racial superiority. Civil rights leader Jesse Jackson called the U.S. withdrawal unfortunate and unnecessary. He urged this country to more actively promote Mideast peace.
The U.S. alone has the power to call Mr. Arafat and Mr. Sharon and convene them and have a truce and move toward breaking the cycle of pain.
Described as hateful language toward Israel.
The United States walked out of the meeting on Monday, you may recall, to protest criticism of Israel as a racist state. When we come...
African nations want reparations from countries that took part in the slave trade, and Muslim countries want Israel declared racist. The United States and Israel quit the conference over that demand earlier this week.
An Israeli helicopter rocket attack in which 2 Palestinian men were killed. ITN's Emily Rubin reports.
The sound of rapid gunfire echoes through the dark streets of Hebron, scene of some of the worst fighting in this bitter conflict. Last night, an Israeli tank shell destroyed 1 Palestinian home. Several Palestinians were taken to hospital.
Reparations would open to massive lawsuits. This major sticking point, as Israel and the U.S. refused to sign on to any document that seemed critical of Israel. The final document did not equate Zionism with racism, but it did express concern about what it called the plight of the Palestinian people, asserting their right to self-determination.
We are not completely satisfied, as everybody knows. We thought that the text as is was not satisfactory, but we nevertheless went along in the interest of the conference and in the interest of our friends in Africa and other places as well.
The final also spoke out against a grab bag of other issues, including racial and ethnic profiling, AIDS discrimination, and matters affecting to even the most sweeping agreement was anything but simple. Before the meeting even began, disputes flared about efforts to equate Zionism with racism and to call for reparations for slavery. It took 9 long days for a meeting called to promote racial tolerance and diversity to work through the fundamental disagreements that sparked a U.S. walkout. The United Nations' Mary Robinson chaired the conference.
It has been, as I said, exhausting. I know I've missed my plane, and I'm sure that everyone will benefit from a break, but not for too long. There is much work to be done. We have made a beginning. Thank you very much.
Robinson applauded what she said was the meeting's chief accomplishment, the carefully brokered declaration condemning slavery and the transatlantic slave trade as a, quote, crime against humanity. But African delegates wanted an explicit apology for slavery, plus specific promises of compensation or reparations for slavery's victims. The delegation from the European Union refused to accept.
The European Union has apologized for slavery and colonialism at the World Conference on Racism, which ended today in South Africa. The expression of regret resolved one of the issues that